Hey everyone, and welcome back. It's time for another deep dive, and today we're taking a look at the global economic outlook for 2025.
Okay.
Specifically, we've got some really interesting audio from BBC News focusing on three major players, the US, Germany, and China.
Sounds fascinating.
And to help us break it all down, we have an expert joining us today with a deep understanding of economics. So each of these countries is facing its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. The question is, how will they adapt?
Right, and what's really interesting is that each country seems to be grappling with a different aspect of this whole adaptation thing.
Okay, I like that. Let's unpack that a bit.
You know, the U.S. seems to be wrestling with the potential consequences of protectionism. Germany is facing the need to completely reinvent its traditional economic model, and then you have China searching for a whole new way to fuel its growth.
It's like each country is a case study in economic evolution.
Yes, exactly. So let's start with the U.S. The BBC report highlights this almost paradoxical situation. You've got optimism fueled by Trump's return and his pro-business stance. But at the same time, there's this looming threat of trade wars, specifically tariffs.
Right.
Wall Street seems thrilled with Trump's promises, but what about the potential downsides? I'm curious to hear your take on that.
Well, tariffs are basically taxes on imported goods. So let's say you're a U.S. company importing electronics from China. A 25% tariff on those electronics could mean a significant price increase, like $200 more for that new smartphone you've been wanting. This could hurt demand and might even lead U.S. companies to shift production elsewhere, impacting jobs in both countries. And then there's the risk of retaliation.
So it's not just about the U.S. making a move, it's about how other countries react. Could you walk me through how a tariff war might actually escalate? Like what specific actions might countries take in retaliation?
Sure. It can become a tit-for-tat situation. If the U.S. imposes tariffs on Chinese goods, China might retaliate with tariffs of their own, say on U.S. agricultural products. This can spiral into a cycle of escalating tariffs, ultimately hurting businesses and consumers on both sides.
Right, it's like a domino effect.
Exactly. And this disruption can ripple through the entire global economy because we're all so interconnected.
That makes a lot of sense. So while Wall Street might be celebrating in the short term, the long-term consequences could be a lot less rosy. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about Germany. The BBC paints a picture of a country that's been a real powerhouse in Europe, but now it's facing stagnation and political uncertainty. What's at the heart of this struggle?
Well, Germany has long relied on its strength as an export-driven economy, particularly its manufacturing prowess. But they're facing some serious headwinds right now. Increased competition from China, a slowdown in global demand, and an internal political turmoil are all adding to the complexity. The collapse of the governing coalition and the upcoming snap elections are creating a lot of uncertainty for businesses and investors.
So they're navigating a pretty complex landscape. And speaking of complex, let's talk about China. Their situation seems particularly dramatic with a lot of moving parts.
Indeed. The BBC report highlights some significant challenges. Mounting local government debt, a real estate crisis that's eroding family savings, and persistent youth unemployment. These are all interconnected and pose a real threat to their social and economic stability.
It sounds like the Chinese government is under immense pressure to find solutions. What strategies are they employing to tackle these issues?
Well, their main focus seems to be on boosting domestic demand and consumption. They want to lessen their reliance on exports and investment. In simpler terms, they're trying to encourage people in China to spend more within their own economy.
But is that realistic? Can you really just flip a switch and change people's spending habits, especially when they're facing economic uncertainty?
It's definitely a challenge. Kelvin Lamb, our expert from Pantheon Macroeconomics, expressed some skepticism about a sudden shift towards a Western-style high-consumption culture. He believes that China's long tradition of conservative spending habits, especially during times of economic uncertainty, will be difficult to overcome quickly.
That makes sense. People are more likely to tighten their belts when they feel uncertain about the future. So if simply encouraging spending isn't enough, what other options are on the table?
Well, the BBC report mentions the possibility of the Chinese government implementing monetary stimulus measures.
Okay, can you break down what monetary stimulus means in this context? I think a lot of our listeners might be curious about that.
Sure. Essentially, it involves the People's Bank of China, which is their central bank, using tools like lowering reserve requirements for banks. This injects liquidity into the market, aiming to stimulate lending and investment. They might also consider lowering interest rates to make it cheaper for businesses to borrow and invest.
So it's about making it easier for money to flow through the economy. But will that be enough to address China's deep-rooted economic issues?
Well, Lamb believes that simply easing rates might only have a marginal impact, as many of their credit-intensive sectors are still struggling. He suggests that a more targeted approach focusing on stimulating specific sectors might be necessary.
Interesting. So it sounds like China is walking a tightrope here. They need to stimulate growth, but they also need to be careful not to create further instability or financial risk.
Exactly. And that's what makes this economic puzzle so fascinating. It's not just about numbers. It's about understanding the complex interplay of social, political, and cultural forces that shape each country's economic path.
It's definitely a lot to unpack, and we've only just begun. Before we move on, I want to pause for a moment and hear from you, the listener. What's standing out to you from our discussion so far? What questions or thoughts are bubbling up for you? Take a moment to reflect on what you've heard and how it might connect to your own life or work.
It's easy to view these global economic trends as abstract, but they have very real-world implications for all of us.
Absolutely. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into the global economic outlook for 2025. Stick with us. Welcome back. It's amazing to think about how each of these countries is tackling the challenge of economic adaptation in such different ways. The U.S. is grappling with the ramifications of potential protectionist policies. Germany is trying to reinvent its traditional model in the face of global competition, and China is searching for new avenues to sustain its growth.
It really highlights the interconnected nature of the global economy. What happens in one country can send ripples across the world.
Exactly. Like we discussed, a trade war initiated by the U.S. could affect German exports, and a slowdown in China could impact commodity prices globally. It's a delicate balance. Thinking about Germany's situation, I'm curious to learn more about the specific industries facing the biggest hurdles. What are some examples of German companies or sectors struggling to keep up in this shifting landscape?
The automotive industry is a prime example. Germany has long been renowned for its car manufacturing. But the rise of electric vehicles and autonomous driving technology poses a significant challenge. They're facing fierce competition from companies like Tesla and Chinese EV makers. And the uncertainty surrounding Brexit adds another layer of complexity, as the UK is a major export market for German cars.
It sounds like a real uphill battle for them. It makes me wonder if shifting away from traditional industries is the answer. What kind of new economic activities could Germany focus on?
Well, they could potentially leverage their engineering expertise and strong research and development capabilities to become leaders in fields like renewable energy technology or advanced manufacturing. Germany has a strong foundation in these areas and could attract investment and create new jobs by focusing on innovation.
That's a fascinating possibility. It seems like embracing innovation and adaptability is key for all these countries in one way or another. But shifting gears back to China, I'm particularly intrigued by the idea of them needing to find a new way to grow. What did Kelvin Lamb mean by that? And what are some potential paths they could take?
Essentially, China's previous growth model, driven by exports and heavy investment, is reaching its limits. Lamb suggests that relying solely on boosting domestic consumption may not be enough. They need to identify new engines of growth.
So what are some of those potential engines? Could China become a leader in emerging sectors like renewable energy or biotechnology?
Absolutely. China has already made significant strides in renewable energy, and they have the potential to become a global leader in this field. They also have a burgeoning tech sector with companies like Alibaba and Tencent making waves internationally.
But wouldn't these new industries require a highly skilled workforce? What about the millions of people currently employed in manufacturing or other less specialized sectors?
That's a critical consideration. A transition to a more tech-driven economy could lead to job displacement. To mitigate this, they'll need to invest heavily in education and retraining programs to equip their workforce with the skills needed for these new jobs.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act, stimulating new growth while ensuring that no one gets left behind. And this brings us back to the interconnectedness we talked about earlier. If China makes these shifts, how might that impact the global landscape?
If China successfully transitions to a more innovation-driven economy, it could have profound implications. It could reshape global supply chains, create new markets for goods and services, and intensify competition for technological dominance.
It's almost like we're witnessing a global economic evolution in real time. It makes you wonder what skills and attributes will be most valuable in this new economic landscape. I find myself thinking about the future of work and the skills people will need to thrive.
That's a great point. Adaptability, critical thinking, and the ability to learn and relearn will be crucial. Technical skills will always be important, But the ability to solve problems, think creatively, and work collaboratively will be even more valuable in this rapidly evolving world.
I'm inclined to agree. This deep dive has really sparked a lot of thought-provoking questions about not only the global economy, but also the future of work and the skills we all need to cultivate. It's fascinating and, frankly, a little daunting.
It is, but it's also exciting to be a part of this transformation.
I think knowledge is power, and the more we understand these trends, the better prepared we'll be to navigate them.
Absolutely. We're not just observers, we're participants in this global economic story.
And on that note, we'll be back in just a moment to wrap up our discussion and leave you with some final thoughts to consider as we move forward into this uncertain but exciting economic future. And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into the global economic outlook for 2025. It's been quite a journey, exploring the unique paths the US, Germany, and China are forging as they adapt to a changing world.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Tariffs, shifting consumer behaviors, the need for new growth engines, and even the potential for a whole new economic paradigm to emerge.
It's a lot to take in, but one of the most important takeaways for me is that we're not just passive bystanders in this global economic drama, we're all active participants.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so crucial to understand these trends, not just from a macroeconomic perspective, but also from a personal perspective.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought-provoking question. With so much uncertainty on the horizon, what steps can individuals or businesses take to not just survive, but thrive in this evolving economic landscape?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves. And while there's no easy answer, I think it starts with embracing a mindset of continuous learning and adaptability. The skills that were valuable yesterday might not be the skills needed tomorrow.
I completely agree. We need to be lifelong learners, constantly updating our skill sets and knowledge base. But beyond that, what specific actions can people take?
Well, for individuals, it might mean diversifying your income streams,
Yeah.
investing in your education or training, or even exploring new career paths. For businesses, it could mean adopting new technologies, expanding into new markets, or finding ways to become more agile or responsive to change.
Those are all great points. It seems like embracing change and uncertainty rather than fearing it is key.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's constantly in flux. The ability to adapt, to learn, and to reinvent ourselves will be the ultimate currency in this new economic reality.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities and interconnectedness of the global economy. It's both fascinating and, frankly, a little intimidating.
It's definitely a lot to process, but I think knowledge is power. And the more we understand these trends, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions, both personally and professionally.
Well said. And on that note, I want to encourage you to continue exploring these topics. Research the issues that resonate with you. Dig deeper into the specific challenges and opportunities facing your industry or region. The more you learn, the more empowered you'll be to navigate the economic landscape of the future.
It's been a pleasure joining you on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this deep dive informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep diving deep.